attorney here on with us this morning. We can take some phone calls as we make our way through. A lot of people I know just like to sit back and listen. I know many of you stayed up late watching the election coverage, so maybe you're asleep just getting
Includes
up.
me.
And that includes
me,
you.
yeah.
And you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed.
Like I said, it's like waiting on a jury. I love that.
You know your way around that.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, I mentioned that he's involved in several high-profile cases, some class action along those lines. We were talking about joints earlier, and there is one, and we've got an amazing image to show, and you call for it when you want to see it.
Yeah, I'd like to see it now because it's a fantastic way to show what the problem is. This is an actual X-ray of a patient who has an Exactech knee implant. Exactech. Yeah, it's Exactech, Exactech. They make joints for shoulders and for knees, and in this case it's the knee implant that's at issue. You'll see where the red arrow is pointed. It's in the area between, I call it the middle of the joint. There's a plastic insert within the metal. What you see there in white, where it's bright white, that's the metal that's been implanted into the joint, and inside that metal, that flat area, it looks like a pan or a skillet. Inside of that is plastic. That plastic is meant to be kept in a vacuum sealed package, airtight, prior to installation by the surgeon. The issue here is that the product was put into defective packaging, which allowed air to get into the plastic and oxidize it.
So over a period of time, enough time, the surgeon in the OR can tear open the top and insert it, and in that matter of minutes, it doesn't oxidize.
Correct.
But if it's sitting there for hours or days on end exposed. Or months. So it oxidize, what, you mean rust?
Yeah, the oxygen, they call it oxidation because it's oxygen that gets into the plastic and it breaks it down.
Okay, it's plastic.
Yeah, it's a very special kind of plastic. It's not, it's specially made to be able to last for years in this metal context.
It's like cartilage in a real bone.
Kind of. It's a good way to describe it. And so, from a chemical standpoint, when that oxygen gets in there, it breaks the plastic down. So the plastic is supposed to have a lifespan up to the life of the patient. Well, because of this oxidation process, this plastic can have a lifespan of months. Perhaps years, depends on how much it was exposed to the oxygen. And what happens when the plastic starts to break, the joint begins to fail. And so you'll begin to have a couple of things going on perhaps at the same time. One is that the knee does not bend or turn like it's supposed to. Or what's worse, that plastic will cause the bone joint to begin to degrade and die, and it's called necrosis. Bone necrosis. That means bone death. And so as that bone begins to die, that joint fails, and if you don't get that thing out and replace it, you could have permanent disability and perhaps even loss of bone that could lead to amputation. There's some people that think, and I would understand why, hey, why can't I just keep this thing in and just keep walking and wait till it fails? You know, think of it like bad brakes or whatever in your car. The problem is it's the risk of bone death associated with this defective plastic in the joint that could lead to an amputation. So you can't just, oh, well, I'm going to wait till it breaks down. You got to get it taken out.
So everyone with this knee, whether they're experiencing symptoms or not, are being told you need to have this removed.
At least you need to have a consultation with a surgeon to do an X-ray like what you're seeing up there on the screen, so the surgeon can look and assess for himself or herself, does he see evidence that the plastic is beginning to degrade? Because if it does begin to degrade, you'll see evidence of it on the X-ray, and that surgeon will recommend a replacement. And in some cases, the surgeons say, look, I think you need to get it replaced anyway because you don't want to take the risk.
Right, which is what I would do. I don't know if you've gotten to this level yet, and we'll talk about how many people are affected, but all right, whoever developed this, okay, had to make it very clear. All right, this is going to work, it's great. Sealed plastic's got to be in there. Where was the ball dropped? That's not one of those like, oh, I forgot to tell you. I mean, that's got to be like, okay, this plastic needs to be airtight before we put it into someone's knee. It can't be exposed. And this happens to thousands of these implants. How? Is it, did the message not get to the person manufacturing, packaging, what?
You know, Nick, how many times have we heard people politically gripe about too much regulation?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, my position is in situations like this, there's not enough regulation.
Right.
Where's the the FDA inspector or inspectors at the facility monitoring how these devices are being packaged and being distributed. Because if you leave it all up to corporate America to do this, eventually they're either going to cut corners or they're going to allow things like this to happen until it's too late. No one's perfect, but this is what inspectors are for. We buy meat at the grocery store.
Yep.
The meat's supposed to be checked to make sure it's not bad meat, right?
That's right.
Well, where are the inspectors checking the packaging on these implants to make sure that the packaging is correct? Because that's what gets corporate America, it keeps them hemmed in and walking straight, is when they know that these things can be inspected.
So you think it was an actual corner cut? Because you're right. In society these days, you hear too often, oh, deregulation. If you're an average Joe and you're in favor of deregulation, you're just slitting your own throat. The bottom line is you hear that from the industry heads because they're upset with regulation because it costs them money to do things in a safer manner. But regulation in general, and true, there can be cases of too much regulation, but deregulation ain't smart, because if you're saying, oh, well, these industry heads, they're going to do what's best for all of us, you're an idiot. They're doing what's best for their bottom line and their stockholders. They're not doing what's best for you. The only reason they're going to do what's best for you is they're afraid if and when you get hurt, you're going to sue them, and they want to protect their own butts. So be smart about it. Deregulation in general is dumb.
When it comes to regulation, it's always too much until it happens to you.
You're darn right. I mean,
if I've got this knee implant, the first thing I'm thinking is, after I get mad and want to get a lawyer for myself, I'm thinking, where was the inspector? Where was the regulation to prevent something like this? Because, Nick, these knee replacements are painful. They're very painful. They have a process.
Oh, yeah.
They work. That's why people get them. But the cost on this is the pain that's associated with having it installed, taken out, and replaced, the risk of infection, the ever-present risk of infection, Nick. That's probably the worst part of this. If you get any infection in the replacement at all, it's going to have to come back out again. Or it could become staph. It can eat your bone. So anytime you have to go through, this is serious surgery, okay? Anytime you have to go through this, there's always the risk of a complication that could kill you. So it's no small thing that the Exactech folks failed to do their job in making sure the packaging was correct, and now they've got a lot of miserable patients out there.
How many people affected, and how's this case shaping up right now?
Thousands.
So this was a very standard implant.
Yes.
This was kind of the one that was a go-to. I mean, I'm assuming the design, if done properly, is a good implant.
144,000 implants.
Wow.
Now, out of that number, how many have to be replaced? I have no idea, because it's still early in the litigation. But was it a good product? Sure, when it works. It's a great product if it's packaged properly. Okay? But it's like anything else. You can have a nice car, but if the car is defective, if it catches on fire, what good is it?
Right. Right. So you have clients that, how a case like this, is this what you would call a class action?
Yeah,
what is
this would be called a mass tort.
Okay,
You'll
this
hear
is
that
mass
word a
tort,
lot.
which means what? I'm familiar, but for our viewers.
Sure, it is a nationwide litigation. These cases are filed in federal courts across the country. And what happens is, we call it the multi-district panel. It's just a group of high-end federal judges, like an appeals court. They'll look at where all these things are filed, and they'll say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to assign all the pretrial work in those cases to a particular court, and they'll pick one, maybe Chicago, Nashville, Atlanta, whatever. And that federal judge will be responsible for coordinating all pretrial proceedings. That's where depositions are taken. That's where patient data is tabulated and assessed. In most instances, at the conclusion of the pretrial discovery, then a global settlement would take place, and there'll be a grid created where such and such patient with such and such implant, may have a complication or two. They'll land here on the grid. Maybe one patient doesn't need the replacement, but has to have surveillance for the next 10 years. They'll be on this part of the grid, and there'll be a certain amount of money assigned to that. It's like workers' comp.
So if there's a client, or someone watching rather, a prospective client watching right now that had one of these implants, and so far they're saying, hey, you know what, I'm walking around, I've been doing good, but I'm just hearing about this for the first time. What do they do? Call
me. And remember this, we have a statute of repose. Remember, we talk about this in Mad Mal all the time. There's a statute of repose in product liability. Any product that's been 10 years or more in the marketplace, you got no claim. So it's now 2022. All implants that were made and installed in 2012 or earlier, those patients have no claims.
Okay.
The claims are there for any patient who's had this made and installed in 2013 forward.
So this has been around that long?
Yeah.
I didn't realize. I thought it was maybe
Some
the
of
last
them go back
couple
to
years.
yeah, some of them go back in the early 2000s.
Okay, so but it's a 10-year back then,
Yes,
right?
yes. And so for anybody who's had this implant in their body for less than 10 years, call me because I can assess the case to determine, first of all, whether or not it's part of the batch, because there are batches of these things, and then I can give advice on what the patient can do. Most of these patients who have this implant, they've already been contacted by their surgeon.
Okay. Okay.
And their surgeon said, look, you need to come in, let's take a look at it.
Take a look at it. As we've had up there, we have your phone number up.
Yeah,
It's an easy one to remember.
6158 million. It's not hard to remember, is it?
Listen, we'll take a break. When we come back, more of our conversation with Attorney Clint Kelly, including another mass litigation with regard to nursing homes and COVID. Again, locally. We'll be back right after this.